Hello everybody and welcome to the first YouTube session of the Pixel Project's 9th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. So I'll be telling you about all the amazing things that we have going on, the Read for Pixels fundraisers, and all the exclusive author goodies we have a little later. But meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project and the work that we do, you can go to our website, www.thepixelproject.net. So now we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session. She is the fabulous fantasy author, Jenn Lyons. Hi, Jenn.
Hello.
So I'm going to give you a little introduction. Jenn is the author of the 5-book A Chorus of Dragons fantasy series, beginning with The Ruin of Kings, which is an amazing book. She was a graphic artist and illustrator for 20 years before working as a video game producer on projects ranging from indie projects and slot machine games to AAA titles for EA. In 2020, she was nominated for the Astounding Award for Best New Writer. Very much deserved, I'm sure. Jenn has generously donated 2 exclusive goodie bundles to the stash of author treats we have set up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Now, both bundles have been snapped up, but I'm just going to tell you what they were because they were pretty amazing. So the first was Jenn Lyons' Dragon Power Book and Swag Goodie Bundle. So this comprised of one first edition hardcover set of A Chorus of Dragons series, which is all going to be signed and personalized, one handwritten note from a character of your choice from the series, and one hand-illustrated pyrography map of the Empire of Kor, I hope I'm saying that right?
Yeah, that's it.
By Jenn herself. So all this has been snapped up by an amazing donor who wishes to remain anonymous, but thank you so much. And then goodie number 2 was the Jenn Lyons Critique and Coaching Bundle. And this is amazing. So this was for a novice fantasy author looking for a professional critique of their work. Jenn is offering a chance for one Read for Pixels donor to have their work in progress critiqued by her. So that's one written critique of your entire work in progress, maximum 200,000 words, and one hour follow-up call via Zoom or phone with Jenn, during which she answers all your questions about her critique and discusses your work in progress for you. So this is Jenn going through and critiquing your entire novel draft, which is pretty amazing. And this one has been snapped up by Joshua Rice. I hope I'm saying your name right, Joshua. And thank you so much for the donation and good luck. So thank you so much for thank you so much for those goodies, Jenn. They're pretty amazing and they've been snapped up. So we've raised $1,200 towards our $5,000 fundraising goal so far. So please do give generously. The fundraiser ends in October 2022. We have lots more goodies, and I will tell you what they are a bit later. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. All right, so we're going to go to the reading and then the Q&A, but before that, you, the audience, can participate. So you can ask Jenn questions. Just make sure you're logged on to your YouTube account, so you can type your questions up into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and then the chat box moderators, Regina and Juliana, today will relay them to me. I'll read them out to Jenn for her to answer. Okay. So Jenn, you're reading. I am going to issue a trigger warning for sexual harassment. So we'll take about 10 minutes. So you can come back, go get yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and we'll see you back at the Q&A session if you don't want to be here for the reading. So go ahead, Jenn. Take it away.
Thank you. All right. So I guess I'm going to give you a little bit of background for people that are not familiar, because I am coming right into the middle of the second book in the series rather than the first. So the thing that you have to understand background-wise is that the main character of the second book is a person named Janelle, who has decided, for reasons, that she needs to get captured by the villains so that she can forward her own plans. This hasn't gone exactly the way she expected. Specifically, she was physically very strong, magically strong, and they have stripped that from her. So she is now just as strong as any other woman. So let me start. Senere led us around the tables until I saw brighter colors than yore and pastels, worn by men and women with Kuros skin tones. These people wore vivid colors and homogeneous hues, colors denoting royals, I realized, feeling startled and disturbed. In theory, these people shaped the empire. So why would they share a table with the man so notorious for his hatred of the same? Then I heard a familiar laugh. Sir Orith. He seemed to be fitting in just fine. Guests had started drinking in advance of meal service. Servants made steady and regular passes around the table in an unending quest to keep the glasses full. Sir Orith saw me staring and grinned nastily. He nudged the next man over, who wore head-to-toe blue. The other man grinned back and made a salacious gesture with his hands. I looked away and wished I had my weapons. I'm going to cut for one moment here, sorry, and just say that the books are footnoted. So I'm going to read the footnotes too, because the footnotes are actually in character. So this gets a footnote. The person who's footnoting, Senere, says, I probably wouldn't have stopped her if she had. Relisvar walked over. He'd been sharing a table with two more royals, although these wore black instead of bright colors. They couldn't have looked less similar otherwise. One looked sick and pale by Kuros standards, while the second man reminded me of Dango if the muscled bandit had decided to shave off all his hair. Relisvar took Senere's hands and kissed her on the forehead. The Han is on his way. How are our guests behaving? Janelle's been good, but I'm worried about the Vashai priest. We had to leave him in the room. There's something wrong with him. I turned my attention to Relisvar, determined to have some input in the conversation. I never had the chance. Well, what bit of spice have you brought us today, Icicle? A man jeered behind us. I'd love a handful of that with dinner. And someone grabbed my rear. I meant to behave. Don't forget, I was still weak after Senere had drawn her mark on me. The last thing I wanted was a fight. But I still had my pride. In my dominion, certain behaviors earned an immediate reaction. And this person hadn't just given me a cute pat on the butt. He dug in, fingers curled in to touch places where they were not invited. So I turned around and punched the man behind me as hard as I could. In hindsight, I overcompensated. I no longer possessed supernatural strength, but I could throw a punch. Unfortunately, I hadn't a clue how to do so safely. I felt the cartilage in the man's nose give way, and at the same time, something in my hand snapped. The pain was excruciating. The man I'd hit had light brown skin, ice blue eyes, and dark, curly hair. He'd just started to grow a Yoren-style beard, still too short for braiding or jewelry, and he hadn't been expecting me to hit him. I'd knocked him back into the lap of the man next to him, who I would later realize had been the man who'd actually spoken. A too vain, too egotistical creature with a handsome face whose bright blue eyes managed to outshine his embroidered blue silks. Even though we stood in a room full of warriors and wizards with hardened battle reflexes, nobody seemed to know quite how to respond. Everyone stopped talking. Even the musicians stopped playing. I cradled my broken hand to my chest, tears in my eyes. Silver flashed as Senere returned to my side. She grabbed my arm, trying to draw me behind her. The young man I'd punched stood back up, mouth gaping, his hand going to his bleeding nose. How dare! I think he'd have said more, but his broken nose affected his speech. He must have realized he sounded ridiculous. So he reached for his sword. Exodar, what's going on? The young man's eyes widened in horror, while everyone else, even the royals, stood. And I recognized his expression. A guilty boy about to be dressed down by a parent in front of all his friends. The way those friends suddenly found the mountain view fascinating, the way they'd all jumped to their feet, told me said parent wasn't a random guest, which meant I was in trouble. I blinked the tears from my eyes, tried to focus past the pain, and took my first good look at Ajin Kane, Duke of Yor. Ajahn Kane was the most perfect example of everything a Yoran man should be I've ever seen, before or since. He stood tall, with broad shoulders and skin so white he made Senere look tan. Diamonds sparkled in his gray beard braids like ice crystals, the same color as his eyes. He was an older man, but still handsome, still powerful. He also had a levos. That unnerved me to no end. His gray levos hair had been coaxed into a standing position either by magic or glue. I reminded myself that just as Kur had conquered Jorat using soldiers pulled from Corvesh, Yor had been conquered by Kur using soldiers from Jorat. The first governor of Yor, later the first duke of Yor, would have been Jorates. A footnote that would have occurred less than 100 years ago. He'd have been Duke Kane's grandfather or great-grandfather at most. Exeter Kane looked like he planned to crawl under the table. He pointed at me with one hand, still clutching his bleeding nose with the other. She hit me. Of course, it came out more like, she hit me. Duke Kane raised an eyebrow at him, glanced at me, and then turned to Relosvar. Am I correct in assuming my son just grabbed your newest wife's ass? Behind Exeter, the royal in blue cleared his throat and started paying attention to his wine. I ground my teeth, wondering if I had in fact punched the wrong man. Footnote. Of course it was Darzan. I'm glad he's dead too. Mind you, I wanted to punch them all, but that wouldn't have helped me in the long run. Rillisvar seemed unconcerned. I believe she's already satisfied any demands of honor. 2 minutes, Senere muttered. We've been here less than 2 minutes. The royal sitting at the same table as Exeter started laughing, clearly considering the whole encounter delightful. From the way Exeter Kane blushed, he didn't think it was quite as entertaining. Rillisvar acknowledged the laughter with a chuckle. My apologies, Your Grace, for the excitement. Let me present you with Janelle Danarak, my newest wife. I managed not to roll my eyes. The pain helped. I didn't even correct Rillisvar about my real name. Duke Kane smiled at me. I'm charmed, of course. A frown crossed his face as he stared at me. Are you all right? I suppose he'd noticed the tears. I'm fine, I said. Is that so? He reached out and grabbed my hand. I gritted my teeth and kept from screaming. Barely. You seem to have broken your hand, the Duke said. Have I? I hadn't noticed. He stared at me in wry disbelief. Then he started laughing too. Turning to Rillisvar, Duke Kane said, I am charmed. Tell me you're leaving her here. With your permission, of course. Rillisvar rubbed his nose with a knuckle. I should warn you, she's rarely on her best behavior. The good ones never are. I closed my eyes and concentrated on the pain to distract me from saying something rash. I hadn't been prepared to be treated like I wasn't even in the room. Someone who could be talked around rather than talked to. Someone who would stay politely silent while the adults discussed the important matters. Footnotes. Yes, Janelle. Welcome to the fun world of being a woman, where it's always like this, and we're all quietly seething. I think I'll end it there.
That was great. That was, I was thinking it's such an entertaining scene, but only because of the way it's written, but it's also kind of horrible and familiar for any woman. This kind of thing happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the character of Janelle, of course, part of her deal is that she is from a society that has different ideas of gender roles. Mm-hmm. So she considers herself to have been raised as a man, effectively. So the idea of being treated this way is just not part of her experience. She's not used to it. So it's hard for her. She is, in fact, being introduced to this sort of thing for the very first time, whereas, the rest of us deal with it all the time.
All the time, yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of brings me to a question, which was, so there are many women in your books who hold these positions of authority and leadership, right? Even though most of the cultures are patriarchal, they're quite oppressive to women. And then there are some women who are considered just property or they are actual slaves. And then there's women like Janelle who are used to, being in authority and being listened to. Why did you create such starkly contrasting depictions of the treatment of and attitudes towards women and girls?
Well, initially with the first book in particular, I really wanted to write about toxic masculinity, right? That was kind of the big thing, and I didn't feel I could do that um, if I didn't feel I could do that as well, unless I had a society that was fairly terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in addition, I was really trying to have a conversation with um, a very essential trope of fantasy, of epic fantasy, which is that a chosen one is going to come around and save the kingdom. And if you look through history, if you look through different cultures, it's very difficult not to look at those things and say, well, does the kingdom deserve to be saved? You know, maybe it doesn't. Maybe the kingdom's actually kind of terrible. So thus the decision to make Kor essentially a pretty terrible place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's an interesting take, actually. One reason we all like your books. Um, okay, well, I want to go into female characters. So we just saw Janelle, who is amazing, and then there are plenty of fantastic, and complex female or female presenting characters with who have their own agency. So there's Janelle, there's Ola, Commiserate, and so even Talon. So what or who are your inspirations for your female characters?
I have a lot. I mean, I consider myself very fortunate in that I've known a lot of wonderful women. Um, and you know, the wonderful thing about being a writer is that you pretty much pull in inspiration from everything and everyone around you.
Mhm.
So, and I think there are, well, not I think, I know there are wonderful women throughout history. So you get all of these stories in all around the world, right, of women not stepping back and you know, being passive, even if later histories try to overwrite those women. You know, I think of specifically like you know, one of the famous examples of literally erasing her name from the walls would be Hatshepsut, right? You know, like they literally the the pharaoh that came after her literally tried to wipe out her name, erase her from history. Didn't quite work. But you know, there's examples after examples of that. Uh, I think how women are strong doesn't always get screen time, but it's always there.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay. Well, we could go more into that more, but for interest of time, I'm gonna go on with my questions. So some of your most powerful female characters, like Talon, are total no holds barred villains. Others, like Janelle, who are supposed to sort of be the good guy, they're on the side of good, also have their moments when they are starkly unlikable. Why did you create female villains who can give the tyrannical men in your stories a run for their money?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that question.
Why did you create female villains who can give the tyrannical men in your stories a run for their money?
Oh, because that's fun. I mean, you know, I so for the exact same reason that it was always meant to be a very large epic story, and a very large epic story um, needs to have a range of personalities and characters, and not all of those personalities and characters. It would have been to me extremely unrealistic to say that only men can be bad guys,
Mm-hmm.
because I just intrinsically don't think that's true. I think that that we are all capable of terrible things. We're all capable of wonderful things. This is not, um, you know, this is not a thing that is relegated to a gender. Quite honestly, I think that um, the society that we have right now does make it easier because of its expectations for men to fall into toxic traps.
Yeah.
but I do not think that they're the only ones that are capable of that. Certainly, I have known, I have grown up and known children who were not being hit by their fathers, being hit
Mm-hmm.
by their mothers, and that does happen too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because women are also people and hence can just be like anyone else, whether it's good or bad, right?
right, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that um, even good people have their bad days,
Yes.
and the reverse is true as well. You know, uh, I don't want to spoiler it, but there's a thing that happens at the end of book one that is fairly shocking, um, with a character that people may have gotten into their heads was very strictly a good person doing
Mm-hmm.
something that is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I had to look at it as, after all of the trauma that that person had suffered, how would they react?
Yeah.
And not in a great way. Not
Yeah.
not in a great way.
Yeah. So, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable?
I've been really lucky in that nobody has ever once said you should back off on, you know, a Tyensu should be more likable. Janelle should be more likable. Nobody's ever given me grief for that, which I feel very fortunate about.
Okay.
Um, I have had experienced, the issues that I've experienced have been weirdly different, right? So things I've experienced as an author have been, the assumption I'm writing YA.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. I used to get that, particularly with the first book. I got that all the time, where it was just automatically assumed that as a female writer, I was
Mm-hmm.
writing YA,
Yep.
and that was interesting. And the other one that I get a lot is people asking me how I write men so realistically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I get that one and a lot, and it's just like, what?
Wow. I mean, men are also people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so
Well, okay. We'll talk about men a little later. But my final bunch of questions about women. So, most of your books definitely pass the Bechdel test with the inclusion of complex relationships between women. Why do you think many SFF authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
because they're not putting enough women in the stories. I
Mm.
mean, so this idea that that a character is only going to be female if their purpose within the plot requires them to be female
I see.
is a thing that I still see a lot, and it's a very weird thing. It's a very weird concept to me. It fits along with this idea that, one of the things I see a lot in fantasy is this idea that, um, that it wouldn't be realistic for, a woman to be in this position. It wouldn't be realistic for a woman to have this particular role. And my response to that is, it's not realistic to have dragons in my stories.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
My stories are second world fantasy where the history of Earth is in no way involved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there. This is a conversation I've actually had repeatedly have to have with one of the people in my publishing company. Is it doesn't take place in the Middle Ages. It
Yeah.
isn't a medieval story. So the idea of that this is anachronistic, this idea is anachronistic, is not valid. You know, so ultimately, there are a lot of women in my stories because I put a lot of women in my stories,
Yeah.
and I didn't put a lot of my women in my stories. That's the thing. That's the hilarious thing. It's the idea of, if you what is it? If you have a woman speaking up 30% of the time, the men will think that she's monopolizing the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, you know, not the majority of characters in the books are female by any stretch.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to name names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but a long, long time ago, I had a friend of mine who wrote a book, and I read it, and I, critiqued it, and I gave it back to them, and I said, do you realize that other than that the main character was female, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
She was the only female. It's just her. Like, do you realize there are no other women in this story? And this was a woman who wrote the story, and she just kind of stopped and went, what did I oh, like, yeah, why does this teenager have no female friends? Why does this teenager have no female confidants, maternal figures, people in her life that aren't male? I think we really get this idea in our head that if, and it's not just for women, we also do it for race, and we do it for sexuality. That if it doesn't need to be this, then it defaults to what? Well, usually in fantasy, it's going to default to a European male.
White male, yeah. Why do you think that is? Is it because we're just so used to seeing that we just keep doing it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is we're used to seeing it. The more we get exposed to stories where that is not the case, the more it will be normalized, the more it will seem perfectly acceptable. My books get called out a lot because they have a fairly large range of sexual orientations in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people ask me why I did that. And my completely honest answer is because it was what I was used to.
Yeah.
I grew up around a social circle that had a broad range of sexual orientations. And so to me, that was just realistic and normal. That wasn't, that wasn't me trying to prove a point. That wasn't me setting out to accomplish some check-marked list. That was what I was used to.
So you said, okay, besides including more female characters in their books, what other thing could you suggest for SFF authors who want to write female relationships and conversations realistically or even plausibly?
Well, I think the thing to remember, and this very much comes into the put more than one in of any group, is if you only have one woman in your story, in your novel, that character has to do an awful lot of heavy lifting, right? If you have as many women as you have men, then you get to have a broader range of individual traits. You can have somebody who is a complete terrible person. You can have someone who is not likable. You can have somebody who is, mothering and sweet and kind. You can have a range of personalities. And once you have those options, the same sort of options you have when you're putting a lot of men into a story, well, then that gives you more tools. So the realism, I feel, doesn't come with any great difficulty after that, because you're not having to have this one single perfect character, this one perfect woman that is all things to all people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we have a very relevant question from the audience. I'm just going to put it up. This is from Misty306. Hi, Misty. So Misty asks, besides yourself, which other female speculative fiction author do you believe has written strong and believable female characters in their books?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of us. It's not like we are we're really not a rare breed. It's just that people don't know about us, right? So, I think of, I think of Kate Elliott. I think of, and Kate Jemison. I think of pretty much, gosh, any most of the female authors writing epic fantasy are writing strong, believable female characters in their books, really. And I think that we are getting the attention that we deserve for that as well. And that is something I think is really starting to happen. And it is making some really interesting trends happen in fantasy that I'm very excited about. One of which is you have a different emphasis in conversation, right? When you approach it from this angle, the idea of I want to Ruthanna Emrys, right? Writes more cosmic horror, but I can't quite call it cosmic horror. It's like taking Lovecraft and taking the Legos, right, and doing something completely different with it, where the emphasis is very much on community and found family and these very interesting ideas, but the main character is a deep one. And totally works. It's amazing. There's a bunch of stuff.
We've had Kate Elliott on our Read for Pixels campaign before, so I would say to anyone out there, go and check out all our previous female authors we've had here.
Yeah.
I think all of them write amazing female characters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it would be much more to find one who doesn't, honestly, would be the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. All right. So just a few quick comments from stuff you said before. So Misty says, Jenn Lyons wrote very believable characters of various sexual orientations. Honestly, I can only think of indie authors who write them just as well. I agree with her. And then Misty also says, A Chorus of Dragons is brilliant.
Misty.
You're totally right about that. All right. So let's talk about men. So although your books feature some misogynistic characters, the male-female relationships between the main characters are generally quite equitable, and some of your male characters they're very respectful towards women, and their characters understand consent. So one of the main characters, Kieran, he witnesses a lot of violence, including violence against women, but he isn't 100% defined by a tragedy involving the brutalization of death of a woman. In doing so, you have successfully avoided using that horribly misogynistic trope of fridging to move the story forward. So given how authors fall back on using sexist shorthands like fridging to advance the development of their male protagonists, did you find it easy to avoid doing so, or did you have to consciously check yourself that you weren't defaulting to such tropes?
Yeah, no, I totally fell into it at one point. Yeah, no, I'm not perfect. I actually realized at one point for the second book that I was totally about to fridge someone for the furtherance of, in particular, Duke Kane's personal man pain. And I was like, oh God, yeah, I'm about to do this, aren't I? So I leaned in the other way. And that was how I ended up with Siobhan, who became like this extremely important character in the series and was not originally meant to be. But that was I mean, it's partially a joke, right? She, again, sorry, a little bit of a spoiler, but so she is, she's undead. So I killed her. She did in fact get killed, but she didn't stay dead. And so Duke Kane's fridged wife is literally an undead roaming the frozen steppes. Um, but yeah, she doesn't stay there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have any tips for authors who want to steer clear or subvert such tropes in their portrayal of male characters?
Ask yourself why are you killing someone?
Mm.
You know, why is this being what's happening? You know, this feeds into, there's a couple of cliche motivations for characters, right? If it's a man, then what woman in his life died
Mm-hmm.
to put him on the quest? And if it's a woman, was she raped or what happened to her child?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Those motivations should be looked at very, very critically. I'm not saying don't do them, because sometimes it's the right thing for the story. I'm
Yeah.
never going to tell somebody never to do something, but you know, ask yourself if that really needs to be what happens to motivate somebody moving forward.
Yeah.
Because I'm betting there's better motivations out there for
Yeah.
any story.
Okay, so do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways SFF writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the reasons that I wanted to write about toxic masculinity wasn't because I wanted to say that men are terrible. I don't happen to think that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was because I think that toxic masculinity is really very damaging to men. You know, yeah, sure. Nobody else enjoys it either, but you know, in the first book, if you had to name the largest victim of Darzan's abusive behavior, it's going to be his son, not the various women that are around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the idea that in this society, the men are expected to be held up to this impossible standard of toughness and masculinity all the time is just exhausting, you know, and not fair, not at all fair to men. So yeah, I wanted I wanted there to be a little bit of a focus on all of the ways it's destructive. Part of the reason that that I wrote Janelle the way, because Janelle is a victim of toxic masculinity. She is absolutely from a culture that has a problem with toxic masculinity. It's just, it has nothing to do with being biologically a man. You know, she's still from a culture, a binary gendered culture that has these unreasonable explanations for the masculine role. And so that's why I kind of wanted to say, look, it's not that men are evil. that's not what's going on. It's any society says, if you're in this particular group, you have to behave in this really destructive manner.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate, isn't it? Do you think that eventually this violent alpha male type of character would phase out of SFF as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that is going to stick around for much longer than expected?
Well, I think it's going to be around for a long time, unfortunately, just because I don't think that like we're just kind of, people are fighting right now to even just get to even parity. It's not like it's a long way from taking over the genre at all. We're not, it's not even coming close. So I don't think I don't see that I don't see that happening, honestly.
That's
Yeah.
well, slowly, maybe slowly. It's more and more authors try to do it.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but
Yeah,
yeah, we're
yeah,
fight. It's definitely an uphill battle.
yeah. It is a fight. Yeah, you're right. Um, just a little break from my questions. We have a little someone say Vincent E.M. Thorne says, "Hey Jen."
Hi, Vincent.
We assume that you know him. So, okay. More questions. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about writing stories and genre. Stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. So the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books, whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, paranormal romance is a big culprit of this. Certainly, some subgenres of fantasy, such as grimdark, violence against women is still often used as a catalyst for a male character's development, or a shorthand to show how brutal the world is. Do you think this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Sometimes.
Mm.
I think there are definitely some authors that are paying attention to it, and there are other authors who are not. And it is frustrating to me because I do feel like it is a normalizing
Mm.
thing, that it is normalizing this idea of sexual violence. Very often sexual violence is portrayed as being romantic,
Mm-hmm.
or the idea of the super sexy man picking up the woman who's beating on his back, but he's still taking, like,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I think of that beloved book of my childhood, as it was a beloved series of many people's, well, depends on your age, but
Mm.
um, Dragon Riders of Pern,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Where it's very easy to think about that as being oh, this is really romantic, and then you kind of go back over it and go, oh wow,
Wait a
yeah,
second. Yeah.
um, this has got a lot of rape and abuse in it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It does. Wow. Okay. Didn't really think about that at all. So you have these sorts of things. You have the general excuse used a lot uh, for A Song of Ice and Fire,
Yeah.
that rape would have been realistic, and as my husband likes to say, cholera was also really realistic.
Eesh.
But strangely, that does not get
Yeah,
shown.
nobody gets cholera. Interesting.
Right. Um, you know, there's one of my favorite writers is this woman named Dorothy Dunnett, who wrote
Mhm.
historical romances set during, her most famous series was set during um, the War of the Roses. So
Mm.
during the same time period that um, Martin's books were inspired by.
Yeah.
And she has a male lead character who is in charge of a mercenary company. So you could not have a better setup for rape is realistic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in the entire series, which is a number of books, there's one instance of anyone getting raped, and it is not presented from a male gaze perspective at all.
Mm.
Um, and I thought that was very interesting, that it is a choice,
Yeah.
to depict what you're going to depict in your stories when you write. You make a choice about how you're going to do it. Most authors present it in a way that is like I said, I don't even want to say most authors because that's a hard one to say. I'm just going to say that there are very few authors that I personally have read that have managed to pull it off in a way that isn't problematic. Again, never say never. I really love the Malazan series by Steven Erikson. And I will be the first to admit, a ton of rape in that series.
Yeah.
The fact that it doesn't, the incidences themselves, of course, bother me, but
Yes.
I never feel like the crimes are being normalized or they're being made excuses for, or like if this happens in the story, it is pretty much the aggressor signing their death warrant, right? Like the full hammer of fate is going to come down on that person.
Yeah, it's very clear that it's wrong.
Right. It's absolutely clear that it's wrong. Whereas I don't always get that same impression if I'm reading some of the other authors, fantasy authors out there that do have rape in their stories.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So yeah.
Actually, I have one more thing to say about that.
Go on,
Sorry.
Go on.
When I first sold the first book, Ruin of Kings, there actually were some scenes in there of more sexual violence. And I had a long talk with my editor about it because she pointed it out and she said, do we really want to have this? Do we need this? And I thought I had to think about it because I was so used to this idea in fantasy that again, the rape would just be there. It was realistic, that it hadn't even occurred to me not to put it in.
Right.
And I had to stop and go, you know what? It doesn't need it. It really doesn't. So that all came out,
Yeah.
Even though it is in a setting where it's happening, you don't need to be told that these women that were sex slaves are being forced against their will. That is not a thing that has to be spelled out to anyone.
Yes.
But it also didn't need to be shown.
Yes. So yeah, it's a choice then, right? Yeah. So okay, in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Well, I think that I think a lot of the trick of it is to I'm not going to say show don't tell, but generally speaking, maybe don't have a character who just sermonizes. Don't do completely fit. But it is if you have someone who is behaving in a manner that is wrong, then you just need to make sure that character gets their comeuppance, right? And gets the censure that they deserve to have. It needs to be made clear that behavior is not acceptable. There's so many characters in my books that do things that are just absolutely wrong. It would not be, I wouldn't have a story if I removed them. But I also think you just have to make sure that you are not accidentally making them seem cooler than they should be. So I will give an example, which is a famous book and movie, A Clockwork Orange, right? So the main character of A Clockwork Orange is this terrible youth who is a murderer and a rapist. And Alex is absolutely charming and engaging. he is so easy to like, right?
Yeah.
And he's so easy to root for, even though, again, he is a objectively horrible person.
Yeah.
So when you have someone like that, you might be endorsing a set of behaviors that maybe you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a thing to think about. Again, I'm not going to tell anybody not to do it, because there's going to be situations and instances where that might be exactly perfect for the story.
Yeah.
It can be powerful to present somebody as likable and charming and all of this, and gradually realize that you are rooting for the wrong person.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it just takes a lot of thinking about and considering and talking to your editors and things like that, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's writing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
Yeah.
thinking.
You're right. That's it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's talk about geek culture. Because we're all geeks here. Geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female authors. We just mentioned it a few minutes ago. Plus, there are still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. Um, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or cons, more welcome for women and girls?
We need to police ourselves.
Mm.
So we need to make it very fundamentally clear that this kind of behavior isn't going to be tolerated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You have a whole community of people that want to think that this is their thing and that they don't have to share. And it's not, sorry guys, it's not true. Like, chances are for an awful lot of them that I was being called a nerd, and in a bad way, in school, being picked on, before a lot of these people were born. So, and I was hardly the only one who can say this. Women, we've always been here. We've always been here. Women have been part of this culture. I mean, it cracks me up, right? Like, we owe a healthy chunk of genre fiction to a woman, to Mary Shelley, right?
Yes.
And that's just that gets forgotten. By the same margin, we have women writers. Again, we've always been here. It's not even that. While I think women are just getting the attention that we deserve now, it's not that we haven't been writing. Because if you go back, you get, your Andre Nortons and Ursula K. Le Guin's and Octavia Butler's and Sherry Tepper's, and I mean, just it goes back, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not new. I remember when I was a kid reading a book by Andre Norton specifically about Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't named as such because I'm sure she didn't want to get sued, but it was Dungeons and Dragons. Um, you know, um, these are not things that anybody gets to stake a flag into and call dibs.
Yeah.
And the idea of people setting themselves up as gatekeepers who are the only ones who get to decide if you know enough or if
Yeah.
you are passionate enough about a subject.
Yeah. And who gets to enjoy it? Yeah.
Right. And what's the fun in that? What's the fun in
Yeah.
that? Let people like things. It's not
Yeah.
that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
It takes
It doesn't.
nothing
Yeah.
from
It
you.
doesn't take anything away from you. Yeah.
Right. Um, I have been a nerd all my life,
Yeah.
right? And so it's very, very weird to suddenly be told, oh, this is a male only thing. Like,
Yeah.
really? Because pretty sure I was playing D&D when I was 10,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm pretty sure I was dreaming about dragons when I was 10. Yeah. So,
Oh, I was younger than that when I was dreaming about dragons. I just, didn't get the box set until
uh,
later.
yeah. We have a comment from Regina, and this is something we always say at the Pixel Project. Geek culture is not a pie. There's plenty for everyone.
Yeah, it's not a zero sum equation.
Yes.
It really
Yeah.
isn't. The more, I mean, I look at our current state of entertainment and media, in which there is more of the things that I grew up loving that are being presented on screens, big
Mhm.
and small,
Mhm.
at this time than I ever dreamed would be possible as a child.
Mhm.
And that is happening because people my age or even younger are getting into or have gotten into the entertainment industry and are in positions to say, we want this.
Mhm.
And the more that happens, the more we get. So how is this not good? You want more people.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it actually does mean more money. So there you go. So you've mentioned before in your blog and in the AMA you recently did for us that you are inspired by a whole slew of women writers, but that people still suggest that SFF books by women don't really matter.
Yeah.
What would you say to this, and do you have any thoughts on how to counteract this thinking?
I mean, it's really difficult. I have watched it, and it is a source of extreme frustration. If you go on Twitter at any given time and you say, "Hey, give me a suggestion for really great books, fantasy books written by women authors," someone will suggest Brandon Sanderson or Patrick Rothfuss or
Yes.
Scott Lynch or George R. R. Martin. Stephen Erickson sometimes too, but those four definitely. And it's like, so first of all, please learn to read because it was right there. Um, but
Yeah.
but then also, do we really look? I love Tolkien.
Mm.
I love Tolkien. I grew
Mhm.
up on Tolkien. Tolkien's fantastic.
Yeah.
Do we need to go into a bookstore and have 2 shelves devoted to Tolkien? I don't know that we need that. Um, there's as long as we have this fixation that only a certain small demographic of people can do a good job writing fantasy,
Mm.
unfortunately, it's going to be very hard to break out of this.
Yeah. So here's a comment by
Oh, and by
Vincent.
the way,
Oh yeah.
all those people I named
Yeah.
are great people,
Yeah.
right? I have met, except Tolkien, I have not met Tolkien, but but I've met everyone else, and they're all wonderful. So this is not in any way me casting barbs at any of those writers, because
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but it's just
Yeah.
yeah,
I get what you mean. Yeah, because people wanted, yeah, instead of naming female fantasy authors, they just start naming all the male ones.
yeah.
Yeah, so we have a comment by Vincent Yamthorn who says, "Why would anyone want this to be a male-only culture? Who knows? Some people." Yeah, and a little apropos of what you said just now. Here we have a question. Just thought I'd put it up. Misty asks, "What are your thoughts about Galadriel and the Rings of Power, the new
Oh,
series?"
I love her. I love her so much. I'm not sure about the rest of the show, but I love Galadriel, and I recognize that she is just absolutely taking a left turn from anything in canon.
Yes,
I get that,
yes.
but the fact that they are taking this very lovely china doll of a woman who is just petite and so fragile looking, and having her be this hard as nails soldier who is absolutely suffering from PTSD and she is messed up.
Yeah.
And man, I am there for it. I am there for her being wrong about a lot of stuff in her absolute drive to, get her revenge.
Yeah.
Massively wonderful.
Cool. Okay. I mean, I know there's been a lot of debate about this, so let's not get into that because we got other questions for you. Okay. All right. Here we go. So, oh, actually, we've come to our last question. We've been talking for an hour, Jen. So,
Oh gosh.
yeah, imagine that. So, okay. So, you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti violence against women work as a whole. So, this is a bit of a Captain Obvious question, but we ask everyone this. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors such as yourself can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
So I grew up in a household that was abusive. I suffered it myself. I had to deal with my mother being subjected to it. There is she literally went from one abusive marriage to a second abusive marriage. She could not catch a break, and that is a haunting thing. Myself and all of my siblings will always be dealing with that. There is no getting over it, right? There's just coping. And why would I want anyone else to go through that? It was horrible. And I think that we as writers do more than we realize to shape society and social views. My books by themselves are not going to change the world, but my books lend a tiny little bit of weight to that arc towards justice. And if I can get one reader to stop and go, I didn't think about it that way. I didn't really consider what this would be like. Then I've done everything I wanted.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I wrote the books for me.
Yeah.
Because you write the books for yourself, but at the same time, there were behaviors that I wanted to talk about and discuss and definitely put a spotlight on. And I think the more that we do that as writers, the more that we talk a lot about science fiction. I realize it's not so cut and dry a distinction between science fiction and fantasy, but but you get this idea. I certainly grew up with this idea that science fiction is where the ideas happen, right? That's where the inventions or the discussions of technology or the ramifications of how a given thing happens is going to affect us as a people. Personally, I think fantasy has an equal power. Sure, our discussions on magic are not going to be as helpful, but when it comes to examining societies and how societies deal with all of these issues that face us, fantasy's right there. Fantasy's right there with able to address these things.
Yeah, you're totally right. It can be a reflection of our world. It can be a ideal depiction of what the world should be. Yeah. So yeah, fantasy can do all of that. I have a comment here by Vincent last one, I think. So Vincent M. Thorne says, your books helped me understand things that I had been confused by out in the world, providing a useful lens into other ways of seeing things. So there you go.
Thank you,
It
Vincent.
worked.
I appreciate you saying that. It's very, yeah, it's very nice. Because certainly, that is, you want to touch people, you want
Yep.
to, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. So, okay. So that was it. So that was our last question. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jen, so much for answering all our questions so amazingly, for sharing your perspective and your stories with us. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. So that comes to the end. Don't go off yet. Let me just put myself back on screen. Hi, everyone. So if you missed the beginning of the live stream, I said that Jen had generously donated some exclusive goodies to the stash of swag we have up on our Rally Up page. They're both gone. Both goodie bundles are gone because Jen is that amazing. So let me tell you what they were, though, so you know what you missed. The first was Jenn Lyons' Dragon Power Book and Swag Goodie Bundle. Thank you to the donor who got that, who wants to remain anonymous. And the second one was the Jenn Lyons Critique and Coaching Bundle, which was an amazing critique bundle by Jen of your entire work in progress. So thank you to Joshua Rice who got that one. But do not worry, we have lots more author goodies set up on our Really Up fundraising page. So we have stuff from authors like Alistair Reynolds, Kwame Mbalia, Namina Forna, Sue Ann Jafarian, Sujata Messi. We have bundles from Tor Books, UK, Random House children's books, and so much more. As of now, we have raised $1,200 towards our $5,000 goal. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2022. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So I'm going to share a little slide here. This one first. So that's the link to our Rally Up fundraising page, and our moderators are putting it up in the chat box as well, so you can just click and go through. You can donate to get all the goodies on R4P Rally Up 2022. If you want to learn more about Read for Pixels and all the other authors we have coming up this month, go to Read for Pixels page, which the link is also up in the chat box. Just go click on that, check it all out, mark your calendars. And the other thing we wanted to tell you about is the Pixel Project's first charity anthology. That's it, Giving the Devil Its Due. So it's kind of like where The Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. It's a collection of short horror stories, and we've teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors featured in the anthology to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology bookplate for early bird buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates, and it will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So for more information about the anthology, how to score a bookplate, go to our website. The page is Giving the Devil Is Due, and that's going to go up in the chat box as well. And if you're interested in getting your very own copy of the anthology, you can order it from any major bookseller worldwide. It's on Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and so many more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. All right. So if you want to find out more about violence against women in general, what you can do about it, do go to our website, thepixelproject.net. We have lots of resources there, with lots of links to other resources and other charities in your country. So go check that out. All right. So here we are at the end of our session.
Yep.
Once again, thank you so much, Jen, for spending this time with us and answering our questions.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So Jen and I will say goodbye to everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.